Hey everyone, Mr. Weinland here. I just kind of want to let you know that this is a more shorter version of Chapter 6 language slides. Um, I had previously recorded one with videos in it. I tried to put that on YouTube, but it flagged it, copyright issues. One of them had a TED Talk in it, which was really interesting, and I really enjoyed it, talking about how one culture's language can affect how we talk to one another. And the other one had a brains games video in it, talking about the difference between men and women about communicating certain things, and how men use few words than women, how women are more detail oriented in communicating things. It's a really fun video. That web video is on my Google Chrome, or sorry, my Google Classroom link. Or if you go to Google Classroom, go to World Geography, you will find that video. So if you really want to watch those videos, which I suggest you watch that version, go to Google Classroom. I'll put a link at the bottom of the comments, or near the, not the comments, but the details. You'll find the details of this video, and then you just kind of go down and it will link to that portion of my Google Classroom website. I suggest you watch that one because it has the videos. But if you can't seem to get it or access it, here's one here on YouTube. So I'm going to quickly just kind of go briefly fast on this. Now, I want to again just let you know that if you're wanting to fill this out on Google Forms, the best thing to do is get a piece of paper and pencil or pen, and just write down the answers and then go back to Google Forms and type them in. If you have the packets, then you should be fine. You'll have the questions here. But these are the questions if you want to write them down. One, what is language? We're going to talk about that. Two, what are dialects? Three, what name does the state of Oklahoma give for a soft drink? So there's a specific name, so we're going to talk about that. What is Latin language subfamily? How many languages does Nigeria have in their country? And what are multilingual states? And what are toponymies? So anyway, we're going to talk about that. If you want to pause the video, write these down, give yourself some space, and then you can write the answers as well. So I'll give you time to pause and then write these down. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So again, we're going to answer all these questions. Don't worry, I'll help you through it. This is part of your assignment. Again, with this continuous learning, I'm just basically going to do these questions. These are part of your grade. You do them, you answer them, you give me the correct answer, it will adjust your grade. Everybody's going to get above a 60%, depending on how you answer the questions. That will increase your grade, but just answer as best you can. But let's talk about language. Language is important, and it's important everywhere you go. For example, here's Belgium. You look at Belgium here. You know, the interesting about the Belgians is that they speak many different languages. They have French. They have Flemish. They also speak, I believe, Dutch as well. So they're a very unique culture. And what we're going to see in a lot of times in society is that they're going to speak different languages based on the culture. And that's a big deal. Culture plays a big part in our language, as you can see in our first question. So what is language? Language is a set of sounds, symbols, that is used for communication. So language is a big part of our culture. For example, you know, I may say, I may call a chair, you know, one way. I might call it a place to sit. You may just say it's just a chair. You may use different languages. I know I'm making this up on the go. Maybe it's not the best. Chair is not the best example. Sometimes, okay, like a stool, for example. It is What's the difference between a stool and a chair? You know, there's what I'm probably the best way to go through. What's the difference between a stool and a chair? You both sit on them. Okay, a stool, you know, the reason why it's called a stool and not a chair is because a chair usually most likely has a back to it. So like when I sit down, I can place my back, I have some back support. So there's the difference between a stool and a chair. A stool, yeah, I can sit on it. It helps my back. Not saying it doesn't help my back, because yes, I mean, when I'm standing a lot, my feet are hurting, and not they're getting pain. My knees getting pain, and then that moves all the way up to my lower back, and that gives me back pain. But even if I sit in a stool, it doesn't give me the proper back support. So that's why we have the chair, which gives us back support. But to a lot of people, it's like it's a place to sit, so it's a chair. But to a lot of people, a stool is a stool and a chair is a chair. So again, it comes down to the culture. It comes down to our values a lot of times when it comes to language. What do we believe in? Okay. So there are certain words and cultures that you can say and you don't say. I may call somebody, one word here that is totally fine, but in another culture, it's not okay. So we have to understand those guidelines, understanding that the rules of language, that certain words are okay, but certain words are not okay. Or even if I go to a different culture, if I am asking for directions or I'm asking for help, I'm not going to just be like, hey, you got to help me. There's a proper formal way of doing that. And there's anywhere you go. Cause I mean, even if I say, something, for asking for help in Mannford, but I try to do this in Canada, Mexico, wherever I go, there's a different way I have to go about it because the cultural differences. So we have to recognize that around the world that we're all different. And here's a little graph about it. I mean, everybody thinks that we all, in the whole world, English is the language. Okay, it's the dominant language. Yes, and internet content and business content, yeah, English is because it's kind of the universal language. Like, if we're going to communicate, I'm in a business, and here in the United States, you have a business in Japan. We're going to try and do some formal business together. Yeah, the most likely the language that's going to bridge the gap is English, and we're going to use English in our products. We're going to help each other in that aspect. You go to, for example, a Disney park in another country. Not only are you going to have the language of that country there, but you're also going to have English as well. Why? Because there's a lot of Americans and other individuals from other countries coming to visit the park, and they use English a lot more than they would use that common language there in that country. But again, if you look at actual internet users versus the internet content, the content is the stuff on the internet. The users, you're going to see the majority of people, yes, are English speakers, 27%, but that's only 27% to 68%. So only 27% of the people who use the internet are actually speaking English. The others are speaking Mandarin or Chinese, 23%. Then you've got other 18%. Then it goes in these other groups. And then as far as you look at the millions of people on this planet, you look at China, they have over 1 billion people, close to 2 billion. And you know, or just well over a billion and a half. I'm sorry, but you look at the number of people they have in the world. They're not speaking English. They're speaking Mandarin. They're speaking some form of their own culture of language. Whereas everywhere else, Arabic is spoke more than English. Hindi in India is spoke more than English. So we are not number one when it comes to English. Now, when it comes to culture, as I pull this back a little bit, our culture is going to dictate what language we speak. We see here in America, Canada, Australia, Russia, New Zealand, the governments have put laws in the past in place to force people to speak a certain language. It's happened here in America with assimilation, going all the way back to the late 1800s into the early 1900s, where we see that we took a lot of the Native Americans in this country, and we basically forced them or tried to pressure them to change their cultures and be more like us, be more American, European American type style. So give up your native language and talk more like us. Give up your way of life and be more like us. So that was kind of the issue that we were seeing back then. But language is so closely tied to the culture. We see that a lot of times, whatever we do in our society, it's going to dictate what's going on in those parts of the world. We see that, in certain places, like here in America, like in rural areas, what's going on in the rural town is going to dictate how people talk to one another, how people act with one another, a lot differently than, for say, in an urban area. So even in America, whether you come from a rural town or a metro town, you're going to speak and act differently based on the culture. And we see this play out in Quebec. Quebec even is a major French-speaking town. There are a few minority non-French speakers, but back in '93, the government put in place laws that said if you're going to do advertisement with English, you got to have French with it. So if I put something about McDonald's, in English, laying out like, hey, come buy this, egg McMuffin for $1. I got to make sure not only is that I put it in English, I got to make sure that there's a French at the there at the bottom, like explaining the as well for those French speaking individuals. The movie Canadian Bacon actually made fun of that. There was a John Candy played an American spy. He's going in to Canada to prevent the Canada from invading basically the America, and he's driving this truck and it has English on it, and they're going through the Quebec area, and they get pulled over and they're afraid, oh no, we're busted, we're gonna be thrown in jail, and basically the police officer is like giving him a citation, like, I'm gonna have to write a ticket unless you come out here and basically spray paint on your truck the French word for all the French words for all these English speaking words. And so it was kind of making fun of that particular law. So it's pretty interesting. Um, so, what is a language? So a lot of times with language, it's mutual intelligibility. Look, it doesn't matter if it's gibberish or if it sounds gibberish like gibberish, or it's something like, I would never speak. It could even be, using just symbols. It doesn't even have to be a syllable that comes out of your mouth. What we have to understand, as long as two people can understand each other, then that's a language. So it could be babbling, it could be symbols, is and even like today with sign language. Sign language is a language. It doesn't have to be verbally spoke. I think a lot of people think, and again, going back to the definition of language, as I go the other direction, as you can see here, again, sounds and symbols. So again, sign language is even a language. So people signing with their hands is a way of communicating. So sometimes it seems impossible, but as long as they're mutually intelligible, like two people can actually have a conversation, then it's basically a language. Now, dialects, which is your answer number 2 right here, is in these 2 points, is variants of standard language along regional and ethnic lines, differences in vocabulary, syntax, pronunciation, cadence, and pace of speech. So how fast we talk, the words we use. You know, like I remember back in the day, the word cool, something was cool back in the day in the '90s, though that was bad. I know a lot of people are like, whoa, 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 bad is not good. I mean, like, no, 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 no. I mean, like, that's really cool, man. Like, oh man, that's bad, dude. Like I know I'm aging myself here, but I remember back in the '90s at one point, the word bad meant cool. So, and a lot of times that happens in society is that, sometimes a trend that has started a lot of times has been taken from other cultures who use those words for other reasons. Probably back in the day in the early centuries, certain words were used as code to either protect themselves or usually maybe to prevent from getting into trouble, or but then eventually those things caught on and people were like, oh, okay, that word is pretty unique, I want to use that word. So dialect can change a lot of times too on cultures. So depending on the society, certain cultures may change a certain aspect of the dialect. A lot of times it's going to come down to pace of speech that will dictate that, how fast they talk, how they talk. So again, the dialect change can go across space, like in different parts of like Africa, for example. The language may be similar, but again, the how they speak it, how it's use is different. Um, Also, differences in vocabulary can change and really affect things. Here's your answer number three right here. As you can see in the map, this is the common name for a soft drink going back to 2002. This was charted. They basically see here in the yellow, any state in yellow, they call a soft drink a pop. Any state in blue, they call a soft drink a soda. In any state in red, they call it a Coke. Okay. And any state in green, Pennsylvania, Utah looks like they call it a pop and soda. Purple, you see North Carolina, Florida, New Mexico, they call it a Coke and soda. Oklahoma is the only one that calls it a Coke and a pop. So, and I know I think it's like over by Lake Arcadia, not far from Edmond. There's a place called Pops. So maybe when the social distancing stuff starts to die down a little bit with the coronavirus, kind of goes away, or at least that we see that curve flatten and it kind of flattens out. And kind of just comes dormant. Maybe if you're looking for something to do this summer, sometime in June or July, maybe head out to Pops there, take a visit, and definitely enjoy a nice little Coke or pop there. They have a variety of pops. They have unique different types of pops named after presidents, and it's really cool. Or old pops that you haven't seen in a long time, so it's really cool. You should head over to Pops. But it's really funny. I know a lot of people, they're like, don't believe this, but it's true. You go to like places like Louisiana, you can go, hey, I want a Dr. Pepper. Okay, I'll get you a Coke. And then you're like, wait, whoa, whoa, whoa. I said Dr. Pepper. Yeah, I know. I know what you mean. I'll get you that flavor of Coke. And it's like, it's not Coke though. It's a sort of soft drink. Trust me, they're gonna just call it a Coke no matter what. Even if you're ordering a Pepsi, they're gonna go, okay, I'll get you that Coke. It's like, no, 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 no. I said Pepsi. Yeah, 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 I know, but that's what they call their soft drinks. So trust me. Okay, now we're going to talk about why are languages distributed the way they are. Again, it comes down to cultures and countries. There are so many different types of language families. And each language family, there are at least 20 subfamilies. So a lot of times it just comes down to how they're spread, how they're shared. A lot of times it comes down to the linguists trying to figure out, and they've debated about this, the classification of certain languages of why is this language called this when it's it's similar or close to that. And so this is something that they've had to do, is break down certain language families. And again, it comes down to the sound shift. And we're coming to another question or answer to a question here. But sound shift is sometimes a slight change in a word can alter the language and create a new language or a new family or subfamily. For example, Latin, the 8 in Latin is octo. Okay. It later became Italian, and in Italian it's otto, and in Spanish it's ocho, and in French it's hoit. I don't know. I mean, hoit and octo don't sound very similar, but you see the otto and you see the ocho are pretty similar to octo because of the O's at the end of it. Um, and it makes sense because in Italy, I mean, Latin comes from Rome. Okay, the Roman Empire. They created that was their language was the Latin language, and Rome is in Italy, which Italian. You have Otto, which is very similar to Latin, and then the Romans made it all the way to Spain and spread Latin, and which eventually adapted into Spanish. They're a part of a subfamily called the Romance language. So that is your answer to that question about language, about Latin, what subfamily it's in. It's in the Romance language. And a lot of this comes down to the European countries over time, and how they spread their languages, spread their culture, and a lot of times it comes down to how they've constructed those languages. And so we see that a lot of individuals have to track these languages, and sometimes there's old languages like a Latin, that we don't use very much, and so these linguistics have to go back and do backward reconstruction to track down certain sounds and figure out its original origin. There are some languages that are extinct that no longer are used, like a Latin per se, but some of them are no longer with us that we don't know anymore. Um, And then there are some that are still in some ways with us and have linguists who know it, which there are some who have to use deep reconstruction to correct some of those different types of languages. Now they're just determining where they came from. A lot of times it comes down to the linguist determining its origins. And a lot of times a lot of linguists have to collapse certain languages to figure out where it came from, discovering its hearth. A lot of times they figure out it comes from Europe. Sometimes it comes from other parts of the world, but it's just a matter of collapsing it. Now, here is the mother tree of tongues, and you can see there's different types of languages. Like you have Greek here, okay? You have Greek has many different types of Greek that's spoken, but it's all within the Greek branch. You have the Celtic in here, which different types of language in Europe, especially Irish right here. And then you have Romance with Romanian, Spanish, Italian, French, and then Germanic, which has English right here. So very interesting what you can see in society. We see that, again, the diffusion of language, it really comes down to how it's spread, and especially in Europe, it comes from the conquest theory of spreading things by horseback. Diffusing certain things through trade. A lot of times it's also conquering certain countries. We see that with the diffusion of agriculture, it's led to the spread of ideas and language. And you've seen that happen also with conquest, like certain countries being conquered over time. Where they have come from. But agriculture is part of that, also conquering other countries that spread languages. And you can see in Europe, there's many different family groups with subfamilies or subfamily languages. So it's just interesting. The Germanic group, you have the Romance group, the Slavic group, and then there you have different languages. So Romance languages, you have French, Italian, Spanish, Romanian, Portuguese. Germanic language, you have English, German, Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, and Slavic language, you have Russian, Polish, Czech, Slovak, Ukrainian, Slovenian. So there's a lot of different types of language. And sometimes language and politics can mix and bring different worlds together in different ways. I mean, if you look at language, we go back to the map. I mean, a lot of times language will cause certain countries to stick together. I mean, there's a reason why Russia has a lot of influence in these certain countries because they have a very similar culture and language. Same with these groups here, why they're very close or have good connections is because of their language or how they discuss things. And same with these groups here, part of the Romance language that can also influence politics. All right, let's kind of jump into Africa a little bit. Africa, it's one of those things where it's very unique. There's many different types of languages. There are different family groups and subfamilies. There's more subfamilies than even listed on this map. Um, some who use language that may be spoken in Europe, and others use different types of forms of language. Some with click sounds, so it's unique and different. And one of those countries, which we're about to answer, is Nigeria. Nigeria has 141 million people who speak more than 500 different languages. That's crazy. 141 million people who speak more than 500 different languages. So that's 500. That's one of your answers there. Three of the more prominent languages you'll see spoke there is going to see French, you're going to see English spoke there. But eventually, what ends up happening is that your more prominent ones are in Hausa in the north and 35 million people. Yoruba spoke in the southwest, 25 million people. And Igbo is spoken in the southeast, 25 million people. This became complicated for them in Nigeria when they gained their independence in 1962, that they decided to create an official language, which was English. So languages can diffuse and really spread, and throughout the Middle Ages, we see this happening with other countries conquering each other through trade. Sometimes with Gutenberg and the printing press, spreading the word through printing books has helped spread those ideas. Also, we see globalization and trade. We've seen different things have caused language to spread. Lingua franca, language is used among speakers in different languages for trade, like I said, pidgin language, speaking 2 or more languages and contacting by parts of languages to kind of recreate languages to help each other communicate. So it's part of it. This is a little picture here. You can see the different languages here being used on the billboard to help people communicate about what's going on in India. We have many different countries with monolingual states. That means they only speak one language, and that's Japan, Uruguay, Iceland, Denmark. Everyone just speaks the same language, but there are multilingual countries who speak many different languages. So there are, though, even the multilingual ones, though, that have an official language. And a lot of times the idea of an official language is to bring people together. A lot of times what you have in these countries is sometimes you have divisive groups and it will cause divisions. And so to kind of bring people together, you have the official languages to help with communication. We don't have that in America, and it's probably a good thing because you have to understand, like, America is a very diverse country. Um, we have a lot of people coming from many different cultures who have spoke many different languages, and it's very hard to say, well, English is our language. Yes, it's the universal language of our country, but the thing is that we still want to have the freedom and the idea that we Americans are made up of people of many different groups, and these groups speak Spanish, they speak Mandarin, they speak another form of language from other parts of the world, like from Asia, from Europe, from Africa. And it's very hard for us to say, you have to give up that language, or we're kind of reverting back to our past of assimilation. So I think we want to be very careful of that. And I understand the importance of official language and its benefits, but I also know that it's very difficult to just say, yeah, you have to speak English. Which, honestly, anybody who comes to America knows that English is very important, but we don't want them to just give up their culture. So again, language is very common. It's used for commerce. It's day-to-day activities. We need it for. It's very important. Its role in our places, and it's we use it to help make a place. What helps reflect our activities, our ideas. And that's why we see Yu Fu Tuan studied the role of places shaping language. And part of his argument with place and people is an effect called that place into being, thereby impart a certain character to it. And that's toponyms. Toponyms is basically a systematic study of origin and meaning of places' names. So why do we give a place a name? The toponym is basically, or toponymy, sorry, I don't know why I want to say toponym. Toponymy, sorry, toponymy by Tuan is basically saying that that we give this name because of certain aspects. Sometimes it's descriptive. Rocky Mountains. Well, there are mountains there and they're rocky. That's why we gave them the name Rocky Mountains. We associate with it because where it's from. It's it's basically the incidents. Maybe it's Battle Creek, Michigan. What happened there? A battle took place. We see possession, Johnson City, Texas. Who owned that area for a long time. Folk, Plains, Georgia. There's some sort of deep meaning to that place. Manufactured, truth or consequences, New Mexico. Somebody just created this name because of what was going on there. Mistakes, Lacert, North Carolina. Somebody wanted to call it one thing, and the other did it because of there was a typo. So it sometimes happens. Toponyms um, uh, is basically we see on a map depend in large part on what maps are produced. Sometimes it comes down to the cultures. So that can definitely change everything. But again, it really comes down to the governments renaming things. It comes down to changes after those changes, and then memorials sometimes put in place. Like why we name certain spots is because sometimes we name them because tragedy had occurred there, or something really important took place in that area. So that's primarily part of the reason why, like Martin Luther King Boulevard, or Martin Luther King Drive or Boulevard, Martin Luther King, with the assassination of Martin Luther King and his significance in our country, has caused governments to name certain places after him. So our presidents too get names, so of streets and stuff. So they have a significance. Anyway, that does it for this lesson. This again is chapter 6, and of languages. You can find the Google Forms to put your answers there on the Google Classroom page. If not, if you got a packet from the school, just fill that out and then just email the answers to me, winelandp@mannford.k12.ok.us. Again, that is Weinland, Weinland, p@mannford.k12.ok.us. Email me, let me know what's going on. If you need help with anything, just let me know. I'll try to do my best to give you any sort of feedback as best I can. Hope this helps. I'll catch you next time with chapter 7 here with World Geography.